Hey, GED students, let's look at a GED concept that is so often misunderstood, even by people who've watched a ton of my videos. So, problem says translate the phrase, the difference between 4 and 16 into an arithmetic expression. So, most of my students look at the word difference and remember way back from the very first lesson of the crash course, Unit 0, Lesson 1, the basic operations, that difference has something to do with subtraction. And so right away, they're narrowing it down, saying, well, it can't be answer C, 4 divided by 16, and it can't be answer D, 16 divided by 4. It must be A or B, one of the subtraction expressions. And you're right, difference is related to subtraction. Now, of these students, some of them might choose answer A and some of them might choose answer B, and one of those answers is right. B is correct, and we'll talk about why in just a second. But what I find is that students who choose both ways still don't understand something. And it's not even just students. The reason why I'm making this video is because a teacher messaged me and they say, Kate, you're not sticking to your story. Sometimes you say that difference is always positive. And sometimes you say that subtraction yields negative answers, so order matters. Which is it? Hold on, let me finish writing this. Subtraction can give negative answers, so order matters. Which is it? And I say yes, both. So if you don't understand how these two statements can coexist, then you don't understand, and this is the most important thing we need to take away from this video, that difference and subtraction are not synonymous. They don't mean the same thing. We're doing something different. We're saying something different when I say, for example, find the difference between 4 and 16, or if I just say 4 minus 16, or subtract 16 from 4. If I just tell you minus or just subtract, I'm saying something different than if I ask you to find the difference. So let's compare what I'm saying with those two words by definition, what they mean. So if I'm just plain talking about subtraction, if I don't use the word difference or the word distance, and I simply tell you to subtract, for example, in the expression 4 minus 16, what I am telling you to do, the communication here is to start at the number 4. Start with 4 items. So we'll start here at the number 4. And then this 16 isn't like going over to the number 16, right? This 16 is how much we're decreasing by. So now I'm saying decrease by 16. And so that kind of changes my idea here when I say decrease by 16. I'm saying move 16. I'm talking about decreasing by 16. So if I were to look at this on this number line, it would be a movement of 16. My 16 would be counting my jumps. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and you notice I'm going off to the left, and that's because I'm decreasing. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. And so what I ask when I say 4 minus 16 is if I start at 4 and I decrease by 16 jumps or 16 units, where am I going to end up? Well, of course, I'm going to end up at negative 12. And so yes, subtraction can have negative answers. However, if I say the difference between 4 and 16, I am not saying exactly the same as subtraction. What I'm asking you is to measure the space between. Difference, also called distance, is a measurement of space between two numbers. So the difference between 4 and 16 says examine 4 and 16 on the number line. Examine 4, and it's not a movement of 16. It's the number 16 over there on the number line, the number 4. And then we're asking ourselves, how much space is between them? So I'm not moving 16 away. Instead, what I'm doing here is I'm counting the space between them. So how much space is between 4 and 16? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 spaces between them. It's not where do I end up. It's like how much did I move, or how much would I have to move if I was going from one of these numbers to the other. And you might say, well, Kate, potato sounds really similar. Like, what's the difference? Well, the fact is that movement cannot be negative, okay? Space cannot be negative. How could I have less than 0 distance between 2 points? How could they be closer together than nothing apart? They can't. And so we have this idea that this can't be negative. However, in the first idea with subtraction, I can end up in the hole. I can end up somewhere below 0 if I make a movement, depending on where I start, how far I go, and what direction I go in. I can end at a negative number. Okay, and so we see here basically this idea that if we're going by the understanding, the definition of subtraction and difference, we can see that there's not exactly the same thing here. One can allow for negative answers and one can't. So that being said, if difference can't allow for negative answers, then why do we use subtract? Or, how can we use subtract effectively? And that's where it comes in that we have to do something. When we see the word difference, we have to do something to guarantee our answer is positive. Not because subtraction has to be positive, but because difference measures space. It has to be positive. So, can you use subtraction? Well, yeah, you can, but we're going to have to use it a little differently. Let me show you. Basically, there are 2 ways to guarantee your answer is positive. So if they ask you to find the difference or the distance on the GED, it's not just subtraction. Okay, it's not just subtraction. It's a subtraction expression with a positive answer. So yeah, it's related to subtraction, but it's not exactly the same thing. Okay, so 2 ways that I can make sure I have a positive answer. If you are a beginning student who hasn't gone very far in math yet, and you've only learned the basic operations, the easiest way to make sure I have a positive answer is just to start with the larger number. So yes, I know that this says the difference between 4 and 16, but again, the order here, it's not 4 minus 16, it's the space between them, okay? And so the easiest way to make sure it would be positive is just to start with that bigger number, 16, and subtract the 4. And that's why B is the right answer here, and not 4 minus 16. 4 minus 16 would give me negative 12. And so for a beginning student, the easiest way to make sure, since I have a difference problem and I need a positive answer, that I get a positive answer is to put the bigger number first and the smaller number second. Easy. But it's not the only way. We also have an operation that does it. We actually literally have an operation that makes everything positive. It's called absolute value. And it's super handy, but if you haven't learned it, it might look confusing, which is why it's useful to understand that if you just do bigger minus smaller, you'll get it. Because I could really actually subtract in any order I wanted, 16 minus 4, or 4 minus 16, if I have an operation that makes everything positive. And I do. It's those absolute value bars. And so I could enclose 16 minus 4 or 4 minus 16 in this absolute value. And that would mean whatever answer you get when you subtract, make it positive. That's literally what absolute value bars mean. So this says a subtraction expression that's positive. A subtraction expression, so subtract and make your answer positive. And so now I see a lot of different ways to write the same thing. If someone asked me to translate the phrase, the difference between 4 and 16, into an arithmetic expression, there's 3 different ways to write it. 1, 2, 3. And you might say, well, Kate, which one's the right way? And I say, yes. They're all the right way. Okay, there's not one that's better than another, but there's one that's easier for beginning students to understand. They haven't seen the absolute value bars yet. Absolute value kind of freaks them out. And so they usually prefer this answer, 16 minus 4. Okay, so again, why couldn't it be 4 minus 16? Because difference isn't about order. Difference is about the space between two numbers. And space is always positive. Now, that being said, you might say to me, well, Kate, why do we need the absolute value bars at all? If I could just guarantee to get it positive by putting the bigger number first, why do you need to confuse me with all your new symbols? And you're kind of a jerk, Kate. Well, I got answers for you there too. You knew I would. The reason is because this is the typical GED problem. The typical GED problem doesn't say find the difference between 4 and 16. It says something like find the difference between 2 points A and B on the number line. The phrase might look something more like that. And, students are going to freak out. How am I supposed to subtract A and B? How am I supposed to find the difference between A and B when I don't know what they are? And you don't have to find the answer. Remember, we're writing expressions. We're writing how we would find the answer if we knew what A and B are. So, students know we got to subtract. But then they say to me, well, do I subtract A minus B or B minus A? How am I supposed to know if it's A that's bigger or if it's B that's bigger? And I say, you don't know. There's no way to know. They didn't give you any information. You can't assume. You have no idea if A is 1 or 1,052. You just don't know. And so we need symbols that will say, make your answer positive. This is why when the numbers are unknown, we have to have a way. You don't know if A minus B is going to give you a positive or a negative answer. You don't know if B minus A is going to give you a positive or a negative answer because you don't know what they are. And so you can do it either way if you include that expression in absolute value bars. What this says here is subtract the two numbers, and then whatever answer you get, make it positive. See how the subtraction's in the middle? Remember, we go inside to outside. We do groupings first in math. So we're going to subtract and make our answer positive. Same thing here. Subtract, make my answer positive. And that is why I absolutely need absolute value bars when my numbers are unknown, but I don't need absolute value bars when my numbers are known because I can kind of cheat by putting the bigger number first. All right, I feel like I talked a lot in this video, and it's kind of a complex concept to understand. So if you're confused, drop your question in the comments, but please, you guys, don't be those people who just say stuff like lost the whole time. I'm sorry if you were lost the whole time, but I can't help you if you just say lost the whole time. I need to know exactly what I said that made you go, huh? And then we can start from there. All right? Okay, so drop your questions in the comments. Let's hash this out because I want you to understand this for your test.